We have two great founders here today, and both, Russ from Cabinet and Ben from Disco. Just want to jump right in. Can you share more about you, your company, and where the idea came from? Russ, we'll go to you first.
Sure. Well, starting off, Cabinet is a sustainable healthcare company. What we mean by that is we sell medicines and supplements sold in sustainable and refillable packaging. And how we came up with the idea, I think, as Ben can speak to, like, so very few companies have sort of an apple falling from the tree aha moment. Even though we tell investors that, I think it's usually a lifetime of different discoveries. So our origin of building Cabinet is really from both of our founders. So myself and my close friend Achel. To speak to him, he's a third generation medicine maker. His grandfather built one of the first acetaminophen manufacturing operations in India, and that's created a supply chain of how do we look at medicines more humanly, at scale. My personal background is I was born in a family of a foreign service officer and a journalist. So a lot of why questions that ultimately made me focus my career on building social enterprises and building more environmentally sustainable or community focused projects. And so really that the connection of the two of us was how we created Cabinet. Our paths met actually on a international development trip, and we were just talking about what we wanted to spend our lives on and what would be worth using all the founder nights that I'm sure all of us have felt. And it was really around healthcare and sustainability. So our company is focused on starting off addressing with the pharmaceutical plastic waste problem. There are 195 billion bottles of pharmaceutical plastic, single-use plastic created every single year, and only 2 to 3% of that's recycled. The rest goes into oceans and landfills. And so we started the company really with this exploration of that contradiction that our medicines that are supposed to make us feel better and make us healthier are harming the environment and indirectly harming our personal health. So we created Cabinet, and that's where we are today.
Then turn it over to you.
Yeah, so on our end, I'm the founder of Disco, which is a men's skincare brand. We're based here in Austin, Texas. My origin story is similar in that it wasn't just sort of like an apple falling from the tree moment, although there was, I guess, partially a little bit of that going on, but it mostly has to do with like my background and then having like a handful of aha moments all come together at once, I suppose. So yeah, growing up, I had a very dear family friend, still is a family friend of my mother, who is a prominent dermatologist. And from an early age, she was basically on my case about taking care of my skin. So as I guess like an 8 or 9-year-old boy, at the turn of the millennium, taking care of your skin as a guy, just like it's very uncommon to begin with, especially at that age. So from an early age, instilled in me the importance of taking care of my skin. So sort of carried that through middle and high school, and then through college. And in college started 2 boutique gym concepts that sort of eventually led me to Disco. So started my career in health and wellness, which just, sort of amplified my interest in skincare and other things to do with like taking care of yourself. So when I sold both of my gyms at the end of 2018, I was looking for the next opportunity and knew I wanted it to be in the wellness space, specifically, helping men. And skincare just popped out to me because like I said a few moments ago, been a long time skincare user, but just felt like there just wasn't a brand that spoke to me and other guys that, wanted to take care of our skin, but just didn't have like that option or outlet or brand that actually resonated with me from a messaging, from a packaging, and from a formulation standpoint. So yeah, it was fairly simple in that I was just responding to a personal frustration I had. I also, at a deeper level, also struggled with acne and oily skin, both on my face and on my shoulders and whatnot, if that's not revealing too much, and found solace in using a pretty, what you would call like a more natural based regimen, but it was the regimen itself, which I think solved a lot of my problems. So wanted to basically take my learnings there, both from the gym and then, fixing my skin, and help other men, who are going through the similar journey also, sort of improve their skin as well. So what we've done is basically take a pretty like fun and I would say sophisticated, but also not taking ourselves too seriously approach to speaking to men. and hopefully persuading them to use and stick with our products. And that's sort of how we've cut our chops the last 2 years or so since we launched. By the way, thanks to Anvyl, both your software platform and your consulting team, may I add.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate the shout out.
Yeah, had to do it.
Yeah, no, the background of both of you and like what brought you into there, it's pretty amazing and it's special, and that's why like you can see you're both passionate about your individual space. Even going back a little bit, like from day one, what are 3 to 5 things that everyone needs in order to get off the ground? A lot of people here are just curious to getting started. What were those things?
Yeah, Ben, do you want to start? Also, brief aside, I think we've actually met in passing or saw each other in passing at the Anvyl office. I think you were like just finishing your first round of things. We were finishing our just round. So it's fun to be able to chat with you. But do you want to start first?
Yeah, I'm happy to take you up on that offer. Yeah, so I guess it really just depends on if you're talking about CPG and consumer, which I imagine is like the sort of confines of this conversation. I actually think, like, while this might sound super cliche, some degree of like knowledge about product market fit is undoubtedly the most important thing that any potential founder should be looking at, especially in an environment where it's much more difficult now to like throw up a fancy looking brand with some decent products and then just sell using Facebook. That doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't happen. I was naive and thought that we could do that. I obviously learned the hard way that doesn't work. We also priced our products in a way that makes it a little tricky for us to go like mass retail. So think like big box, Costco, Walmart, Target. So you can't get that retail velocity. So you basically have to make D2C work. So we actually stumbled, or it took us a while to sort of identify what I would call like product market fit and learn how to actually speak to male consumers. And I think there's probably a period of that that goes along with any business. I'm sure Russell can speak to that, I'm sure, for them. But in our case, like, we didn't do any testing. We just assumed, because the market was indeed quite a big white space and that the trends were pointing towards men adopting skincare products more and more, that this was a good idea. I, of course, still think it's a good idea and stand by it fully. But I wish, in retrospect, I would have spent more time like digging in the trenches, figuring out, who our target customer is, what products they need. I think we launched with too many products too. That's like a secondary mistake that we made. And then also really just focusing on like the core problems and solutions that guys, our buyers are really, really care about. So it sounds like really obvious and arguably like cliched advice, but in a world where you see D2C brands like popping up left and right and many VCs like sort of funding them for better or worse, I think, in my opinion, the most important thing that you could do is do some like bring in some rigor around testing your concept or idea. And if it doesn't work or you don't see legs, like, just move on to the next thing. Obviously that becomes a little tricky when you're specifically passionate about one thing, like in my case, skincare, in your case, sustainable medicines. But honestly, you'll be better off in the long term if you take a more rigorous approach in that way.
Yeah.
Sorry, Russ. I was just going to build upon that. Is there a couple things you would share about like the go-to-market, really refining like your category, your person that you're targeting? Are there things that you would share?
Do you mean in regards to men's skincare, or when you're thinking about testing ideas?
Yeah, for you. Just I think probably both of those would be helpful for anyone.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if I were to do it all over again, what I would do is probably take, and depends who you are, I guess, and this could be prohibitive to some, but I would take, I don't know, $20,000 to $30,000 and then divvy that up across like 5 different ideas and basically put up landing pages and like mock brands. You could do, I'm just making these up, do not take these ideas because I don't think they're good, but like, you could do a water company for one, you could do a phone case company for one, you could do a consumable, a skincare brand, etc. Whatever your like, ideas or concepts you think have the most legs or potential most traction, and just test them on marketing funnels on Facebook, Instagram, etc. Obviously, that's a little trickier because of what's happening with iOS right now. But you get the point, right? Like, you can essentially validate which of those concepts has the most legs. And I actually think, despite the upfront cost there, and a lot of people can probably do it for much less money than that too. That's if you really wanted to do it properly. You'd save yourself a lot of money, heartache, and troubles down the line. So that's kind of how I would frame it if I was to start a new business tomorrow. As it relates to men's skincare, to answer your question, Rodney, I think in our case, we're mostly focused on, for obvious reasons, men that are sort of above the age of like 33 or 34. For whatever reason, they seem to be more open-minded to trying skincare products. And we chalk that up most likely to them actually seeing their skin change, right? So I'm 28. I never really noticed my skin changing, one, because I've taken good care of it, but from an aging perspective, I'm just not that old yet. But when you hit 28, 29, 30, that's when your skin really starts to age. So around this time is when you start to notice like wrinkles and things of that nature. So we think it's mostly men reacting to seeing their skin change, which is why that's sort of, you know, presented itself as our target demo, our primary target demo. And then the secondary, you know, target demo are younger folks who are being more proactive about taking care of their skin versus being, you know, reactive like the older gentlemen. So those are sort of like the two target demos that we're focused on. In terms of how we found them, just sort of by happenstance and through testing. Like we definitely blew through a bunch of money, perhaps irresponsibly, but also responsibly in that we eventually found what works. You know, just testing messaging and, you know, who we're speaking to and who we're targeting. So yeah, I know I've been talking for a while, but that's sort of how we've come to the conclusion of who we target in our business. I'm sure, like another thing I would just add quickly, and then I'll be quiet. But if I could do it over again too, I probably would have gone with a product that speaks to both men and women of all ages. That's why I'm envious, for lack of a better word, of Russell's business, right? Because almost everyone needs medicine. And a lot of people, I would imagine, I'd love to hear from you too, Russell, would probably be buying these products ahead of when they actually need them too, or perhaps when they need them and use them again. So yeah, that's another like really obvious but sage piece of advice when you're starting a consumer business is make sure your target or addressable target market is as large as possible. Some might disagree, but that's my opinion now.
Yeah, I mean, I would just share to the users, if you haven't checked out Ben's product and their site, it's an awesome space. And I think on a personal level, you know, men's care in general is something that a lot of men want, but don't actually look for or find, and certainly don't have a safe place to go to, from a brand standpoint of quality products. So definitely check that out. Rodney, to your question on what would everyone need to get off the ground, I definitely agree with a ton of what Ben's saying. You know, there's very smart, efficient ways to experiment, to test the market, to probe the market. So I put that aside. I've always looked at business slightly differently. I think I come from much more of a social enterprise background where my understanding of the market, to Ben's point, you know, the TAM of it, is by starting with like meaningful social problems. So one of the things that it's a prerequisite for me in terms of building a business is there a fundamental social problem, whether that is environmental sustainability, healthcare, the larger social issue that Ben might be dealing with, which is the industry of beauty is not really catering to men. And I think within any large social issue, there's always going to be a way to find a large market because there's true pain there, whether that's economic or social economic pain. There is always going to be a commercial market for some of those areas that really need help. So my first prerequisite, if I recall, 1 to 3 things is really a cause, and taking not just a market-driven approach to understand what's the dollar opportunity, but what's the environmental and economic opportunity. Because when we inevitably get our product and our marketing wrong, that problem will still exist, and you can shift your business model enough so you're still solving the problem and still making some sort of business model. And so, you know, Ben, to your point, for better or for worse, we tackled something as large as healthcare and basics in healthcare, and then as large as plastic and sustainability. And it took us a couple tries, but the cause was really important. And then ultimately, our understanding of the market was able to shift based on ultimately what consumers are willing to buy. To rattle off a couple more, I think the second thing I would say prerequisite is finding builders with you, is the team that challenges you, that inspires you when things are really, really bad. And if you go this sort of mission-driven approach and everyone believes in that, and you've got a good team of builders, again, it sounds pretty cliche as well, but the changing of the market and the changing of the product is really easy when you've got a bunch of crazies by your side. And so I would say, like, before you get anything off the ground, have conviction, like this thing really makes me angry and I want to solve it. And then have people who you might need to change complete directions, but are willing to shift with you. I'd say two other things are a source of energy, right? I think typically in the startup world, we call that capital, but that doesn't necessarily always need to be financial capital. It's like you just need enough to feed the builders. And sometimes that comes in the form of, attention, or it comes in the form of access. But you got to have that source of energy. And so for the listeners, whatever you're building, if it's not fundraising energy, it better be something else. And knowing that you got to fuel and feed your builders and yourself. And I think the last one I'll close out really brings Ben's point back to the fore, which is like these guiding voices. We typically call those customer interviews or market feedback, but you got to have data on, are you solving the problem or not? And then there's always going to be very easily discovered data on, are you making money or not? But I think if you have those four things initially in place, when you frame the question, Rodney, get off the ground, like you're definitely going to get off the ground. It's always the bigger problem later of where do you go once you stand up, that I think ultimately, people like Anvyl and where Ben's taking his company have really taken it beyond just standing it up.
Just quickly add, the three biggest mistakes I made, which I can just rattle off super quickly, were not having a clear line of sight on who exactly our customer was. Like, we thought it would be younger, just men, which of course you'll always be wrong when you launch. Even if you have all the data, all the capital, all the team, everything in place perfectly, you'll always be at least not 100% correct. So that was the product. I just call it product market fit. I didn't have a team. That was also because I couldn't afford to have a team because I was capital light. So if you can get conviction and at least some sort of empirical proof of concept or product market fit on the idea, and it backs into like your social and sort of like personal belief system, that's epic. That's like the biggest part probably. From there, if you have, capital, or at least a small amount of it, you can probably convince the team to come on board. And it's those three things, plus maybe one or two other small, like sort of less important variables, that I think get the train to leave the station initially. Yeah. That's why we struggled individually at Disco quite a bit initially, because it was just me until April of this year, or May of this year. And that was more not out of choice, but more out of necessity. From a capital standpoint. When I say capital, I mean both financial and team as well. So yeah, I just want to echo what Russell said there and say I couldn't agree more.
That's a good point. And going to the mistakes, Russ, are there any mistakes that were made? And how did you? Maybe there weren't. I'm guessing there probably at least one or two. But how did you deal with those?
We're in a safe space, publicly distributed webinar that we can tell all our mistakes,
yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that there are, Ben and I will share like the founder mistakes, right? It's like, but I like the way Ben describes it, right? It's like, it's a bit of a search process, right? You spend a lot of money. If you find the answer at the end of it, was it a mistake, or was it just the path that you took to get there? And there's always those philosophical discussions. When it comes to physical product and building the brand, I think there are a couple mistakes or a couple things that in the early days, I'm glad we experienced and now we're incorporating. For me, the first one is like researching sustainability deeply, right? There's a lot of BS when it comes to sustainable and green. And I think all of us, no matter what leadership position are, in the back of our heads, we're like, we're kind of like, bet, like, is that true or not? So, mistake number one is like not doing as much research as I could have. And we did a lot, right? We did a lot of what is the latest in material waste? What is the latest in sustainable regulations? What are consumers thinking about sustainable? But I think that number one for me is just like being really thoughtful about the research, and it has to go beyond the Google searches and the book reading, but actually bringing in experts that can help you unpack complicated concepts faster. So that's number one. To push just a little bit further there, I think that also led to like an inefficient use of resources, both like legally and things like that. So knowledge is definitely power, especially when you're leading things and you're using money to find product market fit, to use Ben's words. I think the second is like sophistication in pricing COGS, right? Like, so if we're thinking about where your product goes, like I would always build alongside with the distribution channels you plan to go with, and build alongside the marketing channels you want to go with. Because that's when you can unlock really the tools that Rodney and Anvyl have built to get sensible about COGS, get super sensible about supply chain. If you're going hand in hand with your channels that you're ultimately going to deliver to. A bit of a weird one, but I would share like just getting sophisticated on how much does it cost to bring your passion, your dream to market. And a good way to find that if you're just starting is talk to the experts, right? That's where Anvyl's really good at understanding, the 80% of the world's supply chain to say like, how much do things cost? How can you get it down? What's your path? I mean, there's a bunch, bro, but I would start there. I think that I don't want to suck up the air. I want to hear Ben's answers to this. Those are like two top of mind for me.
You said something there that was interesting. Well, a lot of things that were interesting, but one thing in particular I latched on to, which was building alongside your distribution channels. And I think that's just a better way of saying what I said earlier, which was like testing and experimenting. I think if anyone in the audience or anyone listening, or just in general, is thinking about starting a CPG or a direct to consumer brand, whether consumable or otherwise, you need to be thinking about from the absolute first day of inception, how you back into margins on direct to consumer, and then how you back into potentially, if your product fits like a broader, retail distribution strategy, that sales channel as well, right? Because the way I view more like consumer-based businesses now, there's a couple of different kinds. There's like what I would call like high volume, lower price point. And then you can differentiate on that, which, Cabinet obviously have, like they can, I can't speak to your retail distribution, but like in theory, I imagine you can go Target, grocery, you can just go tens of thousands of doors and build a huge business like that. And you don't even have to touch D2C in theory. Obviously you should, but then there's more like subscription-based direct consumer businesses, which bank on, maybe, $100 CPA or $100 CAC, but, the lifetime value of the customer is hopefully more than 3 times that. And you just bank on them sticking around for a longer period of time. So think like coffees or athletic greens, like supplements like that. And those are wonderful businesses too. And then there's the third type is like a really high average order value. So think like Chili Pad, like the sleep mattress company, or 8 Sleep, or like the saunas, the at-home saunas that are like $600, $1,000, $2,000 products, to where you can back into a customer acquisition cost of $200 and still make a ton of money on each purchase on the first one. And then there's the fourth kind, which is kind of like Disco, where we've kind of wedged ourselves, where, again, forgive me if I classified you in the first one, Russell, but I think that's my favorite one. And if I could do it over again, that's the one I would probably hit hardest, which is like a nice balance of D2C and retail, but in mass. Disco, which is the fourth one, is Disco, where it's kind of like we are more a digitally native brand first and we lean on subscriptions, but we're also capable of going retail, but we're priced in a way that might price us out of like the bigger opportunities like Target, Walmart, Costco, which in retrospect, I would have probably priced it maybe a little bit lower so that we could have gotten that escape velocity at retail sooner. So those are like the 4 types of like consumer businesses, in my opinion, right now. And that applies to things like water, supplements, skincare, etc. And yeah, you basically, the point in bringing all that up is not to like patronize here. It's more to say like each of those has a unique like COG structure and business model that you need to think about early on. And of course you can maybe be flexible and sort of mesh in between a few of them. But for the most part, like you need to sort of identify what type of business you are from the start. And that can sort of define like the second stage, to Russell's point earlier, like after you stand it up, where do you go? That usually defines where you go. In the second stage, after you build the brand, hire the initial team, maybe get some capital and etc. So I think that's a good framework to be thinking about, like how do you get from 0 to 1, really, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just absolutely. And to share for the listeners and how you might do that in a really early day is like if you take those 4 models that Ben just shared and do sort of like a top down or bottom up, and then later a bottom up approach, just getting even whatever prototype you have and just kind of gut check if this was priced at this point, would you buy this? Playing a little bit more of that. I think founders in their early days, like that's not really, unless you're a finance person or experienced startup person, that's not really the sexy part of building your vision in the beginning. It's like, we're imagining when we start companies, the behavior change, like the front of the magazine feelings, oh, you're the founder of this company feelings. And I think that's the learning where, taking from Ben's structure, be nerdy about the price, because it'll help you also scale your mission and the cause that you're fighting for.
Yeah, the last thing I would add, and then I'll let Rodney step in to actually get a word in here.
I love
this
that.
is turning into the
I'm
Russell
absorbing.
Gong.
This is great.
Yeah, I think something I see pretty often is, especially if the founders are well endowed in the money department before they start, is just like not putting in enough work. So traveling, like, distraction, saying yes too much. For basically from January of 2020 until about a week ago, I didn't take a single vacation. And that depends on the founder and the situation and the business. But in the really early days where it's like just grind mode, you have to kind of put your head down and just say no. And I'm not advocating for not living a balanced life. Like, I sleep 8 to 9 hours. I take good care of myself. I eat good food, etc. But you are going to have to, the point is more, you're going to have to say no to a lot of things, mostly social gatherings. You're probably going to lose friends, etc. So yeah, I know that's a bit of a departure from what we've been talking about, which is more like business model and product focused. But I think that's something that I see a lot of people make a mistake on. And I've seen companies that I know for a fact could have been successful if, the executive team or the founders, etc., could have just dug in a little bit more and just stayed a little bit more focused on the task at hand, versus sort of getting caught up in like, making decent money because they're venture backed and, sort of, traveling too much, et cetera, when in fact, like, they should just be building, especially in the early stage. Again, depends on the situation, but that's something I've noticed too. And when I put my head down for a year and a half, the business went from nothing to what it is now. So I can only speak to my personal experience, but that's been super helpful.
I really love the two themes that are coming out. And one is just be analytical and test things and understand your numbers, whether it's your high velocity, low cost product, et cetera, but really understand that. The other one is, I didn't think you two would go into it so much, is grit. Just going after it and not stopping. And there's themes across those two things that are coming out. And I think a lot of people, like, if they were outside looking in, they would be like, oh, it's so easy to do what you've done. No, it's not. It's incredibly difficult. And if you don't have that grit and that like drive, you're going to fail. Like kind of Ben, you were just saying with some of those founders that weren't successful.
Yeah, I like to surround myself with founders like both of you, who I know for a fact, like, are answering emails late at night and whatnot. And again, like, I think there's a balance to be had here, like having very clearly defined communication amongst your team. Once you actually have a team, like when it was just myself, I could just work for 16 hours a day and I don't have anyone to report to, and I'm not making anyone else do that. But when you actually start building a team, which we just started doing, we're up to like 6 or 7 people now, actually outlining communication protocols so that they're never getting text ever from me. They're only getting Slack messages during certain windows. And then if something is needed outside of that window of time, then it's an email and they don't have to respond to it the next day. That's something I learned. I can't remember where from, but I feel like if my team was here, hopefully they would vouch for that being a wise way to internally communicate. So that's just like another random tidbit that I've picked up that I just want to throw out there too. Really defining like communication amongst the team and expectations there.
That's good. You both obviously have physical product companies. What would you tell yourself prior to going into this and developing a physical product? What would you want to know from day one?
You first, Russell. Yours is more complicated because you've got,
yeah,
I'm not going to say narcotics, but you've got drugs and medicine and whatnot involved. I'm just moisturizers and cleansers. Yeah. So you first on this one.
Yeah, no narcotics, but it definitely is, to your point, Ben, a complicated one. That would be number one on my list. Is like,
don't sell narcotics.
Yeah. Don't sell the narcotic.
Yeah.
I would. What would I tell myself? I guess the first one would be staying simple and smart. Right. There are a lot of things that can go wrong with an overly complicated physical product. And to do that all in one go is a recipe for a very expensive recipe, or a recipe for disaster. And so in the context of our business, so we have a supply chain all the way to the raw ingredients of our medicines. We do batch level quality testing, and then we, through our supply chain, actually make the actual over-the-counter medicines, distribute them, supplements as well. And then we make our own sustainable packaging. So our compostable pouches and our permanent bottles, we've designed them entirely ourselves. So nothing off the shelf. We manufacture them, build them over and then distribute them. And I think, for us at the time, like that's the way that we wanted to create our change in the world. Is there a reality where we could have done sustainable healthcare packaging with less and just like a much more streamlined, much more simple product that consumers would still love? Absolutely. But I'm a first-time founder and I wanted to do it all. I wanted to have like a super, exactly the way that our team envisioned it. And so if I were to do it again, I would start with maybe some more simple, but yet compelling ideas. And it goes right back to Ben's points, is right. It's like, you're going to have a lot of ideas. Can you get to the pure essence of what you need to do to accomplish that mission? That'd be number one, I would tell myself. And I probably should keep telling myself after this webinar. The second one is surrounding yourself with experts, especially ones that aren't trying to grab your money. I think when you start a business and you've got a cool idea, there are a lot of people that can help, that want to get paid. There are very few people that are really experts that are also like true partners in growth, right? So I think, Rodney and team, they've really rolled up their sleeves and thinking about how do we grow this, not just only from a commercial sense, which is great, but also from like, hey, supporting us as founders, getting us through tough times. My ops team and my product team with Michael, Stacy, and others, like they're just phenomenal experts in their field that are true connected to the vision. I think it kind of goes back to my earlier point that if as a brand founder, like really knowing what you're trying to do, you might not know the route, but I would make sure that the clarity of vision is there. So then product development comes clearer, right? So during the product development process, just to dig in a little bit further, founders like Ben and I are going to be asked to make a ton of decisions, little ones to big ones, right? It's like the color, what kind of color, the angles, what kind of angles, the formulation. And we know the end state, but we don't know necessarily all the small decisions. So you got to surround yourself with experts who can help you sift through those micro decisions that ultimately get you to your vision. And so the leadership challenge is just like really honing in your skill set on finding experts that care about the mission. I would say for first-time physical product development is like, if you either have a manager or a teammate that can be involved in all the process. For me, I would say touch all the process yourself at some point, just so you can help start making some of those micro decisions, things like costs, et cetera. And I think it kind of goes back to like, build your physical product alongside your distribution channels and your marketing, like just reiterating that point and being analytical there. Did I ramble enough, Ben?
Yeah, it's my turn to ramble now. And we'll answer. I think Matt just asked a question in the audience too, which I can just tack on to the end of my answer quickly because that's an easy one for me to respond to. Go less is more. So I can't speak for Russell because I'm not sure exactly what SKUs he launched with. I know he has way more than we do. We have 8 total, not including like the combination of those 8 to form a few different sets. But if I could do it over again, we actually launched with 7. So we've only launched 1 new product, which is a sunblock since launch. It was way too many. The reason we did launch with a 7 was because we wanted to basically come to market with a full regimen, which was like, what helped me with my skin initially. So there was like logical, rational thinking to it. But in retrospect, it would have perhaps been much easier if we had just launched with like a simpler regimen, right? So think like in terms of skincare, maybe a cleanser, a moisturizer, and maybe like a scrub. Those 3 things would have, one, cut a ton of upfront cost, capital expenditure out of the business from starting with another 4 additional products. And we could have also tested, just selling that as a bundle on a subscription or something versus just like launching with 7 products and a few different sets and being like, here you go. it makes us way less focused from a growth marketing and user acquisition standpoint. So really launching with, if you're thinking about like consumable products, like 1 to 3. The only reason you would go more than 1 is so that you can bundle and increase your AOV. Or if it's part of like a routine or regimen. So, products that are complementary, that's kind of how I would think about it firstly. Secondly, like if you have a limited amount of capital, assuming you do have capital at all, I would spend the majority of that on product and your time and resources as well. Like if you look at most of the greatest founders of all time, almost all of them are product obsessed. And like, obviously the mind goes like to Steve Jobs and people like that. I'm not saying Russell and I are Steve Jobs by any stretch of the imagination, but you learn from people like that, right? And they were product obsessed. So for you to take the jump and start a company in XYZ space, you should probably be pretty obsessed with that space, which is a good segue to Matt's question, which is like, when did you know it was the right time to take a jump? It's just sort of, in my case at least, like the timing just made sense. I had personally like sold those 2 gyms. I didn't have a full-time job. I was kind of, I wouldn't say like chilling or relaxing in Austin. Like I was aggressively coming up with concepts and thinking of businesses to start. But skincare like jumped out to me and just seemed very obvious because of my personal experience. And then also like the opportunity in the space. So I didn't like sort of identify as a founder until I raised a little bit of money. I incorporated the business and I hit go on like the brand development and the product development with Anvyl. But if I was in a full-time job, I would generally recommend, and this is the advice I give to like friends and stuff, having gone through like a pretty arduous founder journey with Disco, I would not leave like a cushy job until you're almost certain that you can one, get customers or get enough people in a beta to like actually make a business out of it. And whether that's like, stand it up on your own without outside funding or take outside funding, because then you'll be securitized. And it also matters like what stage of your life you're in, right? Do you have family? Do you have kids? Yeah. All these things are variables that go into it. Generally, like the younger you are, the easier it is to take the plunge because it's just less risky in the grand scheme of things. So I know that's a bit of like a non-answer, but it's sort of, at least in my case, was just like a very obvious one. So I think it presents itself when you know the opportunity is there, you're really passionate about it. And if you do the experimenting and data validation, then you should know with like quite a high degree of certainty, like that you could be potentially successful. So I think that sort of makes it a little bit easier of a pill to swallow. I don't know. I'll pass that to you, Russ. Hopefully you can see the question in the chat.
Yeah, it's a great question. To go off of the last thing that you said though, before that is we launched with 19 SKUs. So like right out the bat. But the reason that we did it is, and it goes back to building hand in hand with your distribution channel. If you're going direct to consumer, I would strongly advise you follow some of the words of caution with Ben, because your resources are limited. You need to either use bundling to drive AOV. You got to keep that landing page experience simple, no distractions. We launched on a marketplace from a marketplace standpoint. So we built our business initially through an Amazon marketplace where you can really spin up landing pages, drive revenue. And that was ultimately what we used to bootstrap our company to fund the remainder of the business. And so that's, again, examples of like, you got to build hand in hand with your distribution channel. We're in this space right now where we're working with a variety of different retailers and mass distribution, where that variety of SKUs is actually one of our competitive advantages, so that we can share to retailers that are really looking to rebuild the aisles of a pharmacy. We can quite literally do that by ourselves. But when it comes to the direct-to-consumer space, we will still have the same questions of focus. And that's where this next launch of our site come October, you got to be clear and focus on the marketing team. Otherwise, you're going to have also an internal rebellion with your marketing people. But to the question on like transition and going into full time, I have nothing else to add than what Ben's shared. I think it's super wise to consider your own personal space. My personal journey, I was actually coming off of military service. So Rodney, you'd appreciate this, but some of the first designs of Cabinet, my co-founder would mail me wireframes of the website. I was actually going through Ranger School at the time, and then I would design them under Redlands. And so for me, it was a bit of a culmination of, am I financial ready for this? Is this something that I'm willing to kind of call to myself as like what I do for my life? And then my second job at the time, or my actual full-time job, is I was working at a big consulting firm, and they were really supportive of thinking, look, if you're delivering your client work, spend your time, however you want to do your nights and weekends. There is an economic calculus, though, that Ben speaks to, which is like, until you have that security financially, you can still do a lot of what the startup world does with a full-time job until you feel like that level of success is higher.
Yeah, thanks for your, am I muted? No, thanks for your service, Russell. Again, this just keeps going back to like experimentation. Like you can really de-risk yourself for taking the plunge, so they say, on an idea or concept by experimentation. I just think that's the answer, or at least becoming the theme of this chat in particular, is just rigorous experimentation. By the way, when you relaunch your website, I just caught on that as well. Definitely make sure that you use creatives that like tell that story that you just told, because the more impactful and like, I guess, personal the founder is in their story, and you have a great one, even though I only heard like 10 seconds of it, that bodes really well. And I don't think it's disingenuous to leverage that, as long as you're comfortable. That's super interesting. Like for me, if I'm looking at Cabinet versus like, I don't know, make up a competitor, I'm choosing you every time because of that story. So yeah, I don't know, as someone who's like very growth marketing heavy now and D2C, to your point, like stories like that with something I don't have are just like a godsend. So yeah, my point is leverage that if you're comfortable in the right way, because that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree. And Russ, the last thing I'd ever want to do when I was going through Ranger School is thinking about launching a company. I was just trying to survive. So
yeah, I think both of us, yeah.
And the second, if you have a question, anyone in the audience, like Matt did, please feel free to drop it in. That was a great question. So looking forward to more. And I'll add on, kind of like, for me, it was like a burning thing where it's like, I would think about it always, and I couldn't escape it. And when that kept on overcoming my current role, I was like, you have to do this. You'd be foolish not taking that leap or that risk. And for me, it was just like personal, less so like the validation aspect. It's more so like inside, internally, was a push. Totally. That was a great question, Matt. Launching physical products, super expensive, around tooling, something we didn't talk about, but creating multiple SKUs. If you do custom products, the tooling expense for that is crazy high. One aspect, not necessarily on the tooling with physical products, is working with a contract manufacturer to do like turnkey. They control everything versus go out and do everything, sourcing all of your raw materials, your primary packaging, secondary packaging, etc. How do the two of you look at that? And what trade-offs, or what would you do if you're going to give advice to the audience? Russ, we'll go to you first, and then Ben to you after.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would share a little bit more of an academic answer, and then a personal answer would just be more, it really depends on the stage of your company. But I think that for the audience that is looking to build brands, like contract manufacturing is really a way that just make sure you're thinking about cost savings, and that you're not trying to rebuild things that you don't need to own in your own enterprise. And so naturally the benefits of contract manufacturing are the cost savings, the economies of scale, the advanced skills that you can bring on, and the focus that contract manufacturers can provide. And then there is so much to learn in the world, and ultimately you as a founder are trying to teach customers something that you find unique. And so to hone in your time is to focus on the unique value, the unique product that you're bringing to the world, meaning that the remainder 80% of the stuff that requires to bring that vision to life, it is really valuable to have contract manufacturers do that. Naturally it comes with its own downsides, whether that's sort of the lack of control if you need it. The relationships can be exhausting if you don't have the right team or the right platform to support you. And so the quality and intellectual questions that you might need to be cautious of. But I think organizations like Rodney's and others really guard you against those things. But if you are in a business where control, like quality, and those kinds of things are, well, I guess those are managed. But if those are things that are like part of your business model, then contract manufacturing might be a way to get you to market, and then you scale out. In the case of Cabinet, like we are fundamentally going to pull from the supply chain, whether that's our health product supply chain or our actual packaging that we've built. We will always be, a step removed. We will never absorb that, because our value that we bring to the world and our customers is the quality checks on the medicine, the human experiences and services around it, and then ultimately the sustainability forwardness. And so like for me, it's like the only way to go in the short term.
Yeah, I just echo what Russell said as well. And I think this ties into another question that was offered up in the chat there, which is like, yeah, I would over-index on product and bring in experts around you, even if you don't have that much capital or any at all on the product side, because that is where you could make the biggest mistakes. And if you make product mistakes, both in quality or packaging, et cetera, those are things that potentially you can't come back from, especially if you're very early stage and very bootstrapped and limited in capital. So meeting Anvyl was very timely for us. So we incorporated in like November of 2018, and then I started working formally on the business at the beginning of January, both in parallel to like developing the brand. So I can't remember exactly how I was introduced to Anvyl, but it was very serendipitous and it was very fortunate. And Anvyl basically helped us from step one of incorporation all the way to our launch and beyond. We're still partners to this day. But without them, like it would be a very different scenario. I tried to, in Q4 of 2018, when I was sort of like about to start working on the business, I tried to like sort of explore contract manufacturing myself. And yeah, with any smart person, like you can figure it out over time, but you're going to make so many mistakes and it's going to cost you so much time and money that, again, like I would over index on surrounding yourself with supply chain or product people early on over anything else. You can figure out product marketing, you can figure out finance, you can figure out these other things, and you can sort of self-teach yourself those over time or bring in people as you scale. But if you don't get product right, nothing else falls into place. So yeah, long story short, like contract manufacturing, especially for skincare, just makes a ton of sense. It's very rare for a brand in the beauty or cosmetic space to formulate their own products. And if they do, they're 9-figure plus annually in revenue. So for me, it was a no-brainer as well.
Yeah, building on one of the questions, there's like a theme about like getting started, where to go, whether you can find, a great partner or you hire the right person. One of the questions obviously, Ben, you're talking about fundraising and getting capital. How's that for like an early, stage company founder making a physical product? What did you do there? Obviously it's critical, right, to be successful.
Yeah, I was fortunate in that I had 2 wins, albeit not massive ones, in the sale of the gym. So like I hadn't, scaled a VC backed business per se, but I had some of my own capital. I had a little bit of credibility. If you don't have like even that little notch of credibility that I had, I think network in general is super important. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, go to all the Tony Robbins events that you can, which if you like those events, great too. But like, I mean, regularly put yourself out there 2 to 3 times per week when you're in the earliest part of your career, just like meeting people. And I know it's arduous and difficult and at times like really monotonous, to use another SAT word, but those are absolutely describe my experience. But eventually like you'll crack into a group of people or an echelon of folks, if you are a good person and help people and generally bring value to the table, that will sort of level up you as well. So in my case, like when I first started Disco at the end of 2018, the second I incorporated the business, I started talking to like 5 to 10 people a week. I would just reach out to them on LinkedIn. I'd ask other people, who should I speak to? And I just kept a list. And it sounds like kind of crazy, but I would just follow up with them like once a quarter after I spoke to them initially and see how things were going. And I'd remember something that they mentioned to me and ask how it was going. And it might sound disingenuous, but now I've built like hundreds of solid relationships with folks that I know at a moment's notice, like they can count on me if they need anything, and vice versa. So networking in general, I think, is very important, especially in the space that you're in. So that's obviously been helpful from a fundraising perspective. Obviously, traction is the most important, beyond just like knowing people. And I think that's where experimenting comes into play. Like if you can prove out that you can sell X number of, acetaminophen, pills at, well, I'm making this up, right, at Walgreens, then for a fact that you can probably, sell X number of, Tylenols. I'm just making this up. So same for skincare. Or if you know for a fact that you can acquire a customer for $50 CPA on Facebook, to buy a cleanser and a scrub and a moisturizer, and you can get that to a degree of scale and they stick around, like you can raise money off of that. It's also a very frothy market right now, to where there's a lot of capital being thrown around. So timing, I think, is important too. But it's really just a combination of networking and getting yourself out there, which anyone can do. You don't have to go to an Ivy League school, or come from some prestigious, big three consulting firm or bank to take part in. I think it's number one. And then number two is the experimentation thing. There are other angles to it. But that's like the fastest way, like the shortcut, if you want to be able to, build a VC-backed business quickly. Those are really the two doors that I would, sort of open if I was focused on it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything on your end, Russ?
I mean, it's everything I echo and share. I'll speak to our investors. Like we've got some awesome investors. We have very mission-driven ones. We have an impact fund called the Global Impact Fund, and another group called SoGal Ventures, and then a group of just friends and family that have invested in the company. I would share that the networking and getting to know just other people who could be your advisors, your advocates, your champions is awesome. The fundraising process sucks though. Like the going door to door and making a pitch, it's horrible. And I think that there are a lot of resources, however, to get some of that muscle there. And it's part of the process. It's part of refining and sharpening your vision. It's part of like its early signals and market signals, while not absolute at all. It does help you think about, competitive edges and where your company, if you are interested to have an exit, acquire, like it gives you just another market view of it. And so, we were fortunate enough to join an accelerator program called Techstars, which helped us with some of those exercises, and then a good founder network, which, I think to Ben's point, you don't need an Ivy League background, although those are great, but you do need friends and you do need people who are like believers in you, whether that's like purely just because they like Ben because he's a good guy, or they believe in Rodney because they've, in a separate world, have like been alongside with him. So I would say, it kind of goes back to some of the core truths for me, which is if you do have a cause that makes you angry or passionate enough, and it is a substantive social cause with a large total addressable market, the capital will come. And you just need to be able to tell that story of how you plan to chip away at that. And yeah, it's just, I love the idea of Ben just like putting aside a couple meetings, because you can use those almost like the same way you're doing coffee dates or whatever that might be. It's a good way to get that muscle into play.
Yeah, it'll never hurt you.
It'll never hurt you.
It'll never hurt you. And if you're a good person, which I imagine most people on this, or all of us are, for the most part, it'll pay dividends too, like in a more transactional way. But also you just get to learn from people too. And some of those people might end up being serious experts, that can be very helpful. The last thing I'd just add quickly on fundraising is it's a process, as everyone knows, but you need to run it in a very organized fashion. That's the way you raise money. You set 90 days or whatever it is, 120 days. You build a list of 100 or 200 prospects, whatever it is. You classify them based on who they are: angel, fund, family office. And then you go out. And the first 2 weeks, you just send them your pitch deck, your overview email, most likely not your financial model. I don't usually share that until second or third call. And you just start storytelling with them. And then after that first round of conversations is over, a group will fall off. Then you move to the second round, another group will fall off. And then hopefully the third and fourth calls, you have some investors that are left over that either believe in you or the social impact mission you're invested in, or for some reason are bought into your team, one of your team members, and will end up investing in you. And I know that's kind of trivializing a little bit, but there are tons of helpful resources out there that can help you build that list. And if you take the time to network with people, you'll end up, like in our case, having a list of 100 to 150 people that I actually know that I went out to. And that wasn't because, I knew them from Harvard or XYZ. I just had networked for like a year and a half. So had like a pretty healthy list of people to speak to. And again, like that's open to anyone. So yeah, happy to chat more any other time with others about that. Again, I haven't raised the most money in the world, so they're probably better people, but I was able to raise money just through staying really organized and being diligent about talking to people.
We're coming up on time. I just want to personally thank you both for spending time out of your day. I know you're both incredibly busy. Thank you for your words of advice and for really starting amazing brands. Please, everyone, check out their companies. You can check out Disco at letsdisco.com, and then Cabinet is cabinethealth.com. Please go there, try their products, amazing products. I've tried them, and just even incredible founders. And thank you again.
Thanks, Rodney, for having us.
Thank you, Rodney. Russ, good to chat with you as well. It's been
Ben. Take it easy, man.
2-3 years since I've seen you.
Yeah, buddy. Take care.
All right, y'all. Thank you.